Hi everyone, welcome to week 7. I cannot believe that this is kind of our last week in terms of covering all the materials and everything. I hope that you all had a great weekend. Um, so for this week, we're gonna guys, you'll be busy. Before I forget, let me just remind you that tonight actually, the Dropbox for the term paper will be closed at 11:30 p.m. So make sure that you upload your papers before 11:30. Otherwise, you won't be upload to anything. Do not please email me anything. If you miss it, you will get 0. Okay, so I'm not going to extend the deadline. So 11:30 tonight, October 5th, which is a Monday. Today is your last day. Also, before I talk about the chapters we're going to cover, let me remind you that our final exam will be open on October 9th, and you have few days to finish it. The final will be closed on October 15th. It's cumulative, meaning that you should study from the beginning. Of course, the focus will be on kind of new chapters that we covered after the midterm, but it does not mean that you are not getting questions, let's say, from chapter 3 or opportunity cost. So make sure that you review also everything you had. I tried actually to give you a little bit more time this time since the test is proctored. So make sure you have webcam ready. If you do not have a webcam, you won't be able to take the test, okay? So make sure you have everything ready. Your internet is good. I had few students who had problem with the internet. Honestly, it is your job to make sure that everything is right on your at your end. It is not my responsibility. I try to be kind of flexible with everybody for the midterm, but I have few days to send your grade to school, to the college, so I really don't have time to give you extension for the final, okay? So make sure you have everything ready, your computer is ready, your webcam is ready, you have good connection, and then start taking the test. Again, the test is timed, okay? All right. So last week we talked about chapter 14. This week we're going to cover our 2 last chapters that are connected to chapter 14 and chapter 12. Okay. So and I tried actually to keep both chapters kind of short. So definitely read the book, but if I do not, and the textbook. So, but if I didn't cover something in the lecture notes, and you see that section on the textbook, I'm not going to ask about that section. Okay, I'm just going to ask about those topics that I put on the lecture notes. So I would say definitely compare the textbook with my notes when you are getting ready for the test and when you are studying and understanding these 2 chapters. Chapter 13 is about fiscal policy, and chapter 16 is about monetary policy. I'm going to be brief because I know that most of you guys don't like long videos, so I want to have your attention in my videos, weekly videos. That's the reason that I put them, but make sure that you check out everything that I posted on D12 for this week, for week 7. For fiscal policy, so you need to know what we mean by fiscal policy. And fiscal policy is nothing but the change in government spending or government tax, okay? So tax and government spending are 2 strong tools for the government basically to control the economy, all right? And in this chapter, we want to see basically how the government is able to use taxes and government spending, its own spending, to fix recession and inflation. That's why we need chapter 12, because in chapter 12, we talked about aggregate demand, aggregate supply. We talked about macroeconomic equilibrium. We talked about full employment, okay? I'm just going to talk a little bit about recession because it's kind of relevant to what's going on in our country and around the world, honestly. And then you can think about inflation and kind of the opposite way. So let's say we have recession, how the government can help the economy, okay? That's the question we're trying to answer in this chapter. So when we have recession, it means that the economy is slow, unemployment rate is high, inflation rate is high. However, side note, the Federal Reserve is taking care of the inflation rate for us, okay? So They have a target of 2% for inflation rate, so the Federal Reserve doesn't allow the inflation rate to go up as much as you see perhaps in other countries. But anyhow, that's the typical things that happen during recession times, okay? And if you remember from chapter 12, it means that the aggregate demand actually is low, right? We have a gap between real GDP, the actual real GDP, and our potential GDP. Potential GDP was the level of real GDP when the economy is at full employment, okay? We have that gap when we have recession. We call that gap recessionary gap. The government can actually eliminate that recessionary gap and help us to kind of recover from recession by either spending more in the economy, so the G component in GDP increases, right? Or the government can give us tax breaks, tax cuts. Both of them will increase the aggregate demand, because the goal here when we have recession for the government is to increase the aggregate demand, to eliminate the recessionary gap. So if we push the aggregate demand back and shift it rightward, then we can close that gap, okay? Which one is more effective? Typically, the government spending is more effective than tax cuts, okay? If we have deep recession, economists believe that the government spending, again, will be more effective than tax cuts. So imagine, so many people lost their job during pandemic, right? So even if you give them tax cuts, it's not going to help them. They don't have any income. Okay, so just give them tax cuts, pay zero tax. They don't have any income to pay any tax, right? The tax cut is not really that effective. That's why the government is, government starts spending during recession times. Paychecks are coming to some households. The government will start spending in infrastructure, helping businesses. So these are different ways that the government can spend money in the economy, right? So when you read the chapter 13, pay attention to the graph, how we can move the aggregate demand back. Again, it's related to chapter 12, so if you forgot about aggregate demand, aggregate supply, definitely go back, okay? For inflation, the government actually is doing the opposite. The government should reduce the aggregate demand and close the inflationary gap, okay? So we call actually, so we have two different types of fiscal policy, but the focus of our chapter is not on automatic fiscal policy. So you can skip that part, just know what it means, but our focus is not really on automatic fiscal policy, okay? So we are more focused on, I'm just trying to look at my notes. So we are more focused on the other type of fiscal policy. And whenever we have, remember, so we're more focused on discretionary fiscal policy. And what I just explained for recession and dealing with recession is called expansionary fiscal policy. But the inflationary, when we have inflation and we want to deal with inflationary gap, the government starts implementing contractionary fiscal policy, reducing the aggregate demand, okay? Okay, I was looking for this part. So in the notes, I put something which is called government expenditure multiplier, and we also have the same thing for tax multiplier. So basically, if I want to explain it briefly, is when the government tries to increase that aggregate demand, the aggregate demand doesn't go up overnight. It takes a while for the aggregate demand to kind of adjust and shift rightward. So this increase in aggregate demand happens very, very slowly. So the government will start giving us a paycheck. So it takes us a while for, as a consumer, to spend that money, right? Because we are skeptical about future. We are dealing with still recession, so we try to save a little bit. But the goal of the government is for us is to spend that money to increase the C component in GDP, right? So C eventually will go up. As a result, the aggregate demand will increase. That's what we mean by this government expenditure multiplier or the tax multiplier. So the aggregate demand will go up eventually, step by step, okay? So look at the definitions that I put here for you for both expansionary fiscal policy, contractionary fiscal policy, and pay attention also to the graph. And again, the graph is very, very similar to what we had in chapter 12. Okay, that's pretty much it. I'm just looking at my notes. That's pretty much it for fiscal policy. Monetary policy, chapter 16, is related to the money market we had at the end of chapter 14 last week. So if you still have questions about that chapter, especially about the money market, review the chapter. Let me know if you have also any questions, okay? In chapter 13, we'll see how the government can fix recession and inflation. In chapter 16, we'll see how the Federal Reserve as a central bank can deal with recession and inflation. The Federal Reserve, as you also remember from last week, has interest rates, right, as the important tool kind of to play with in the money market. The Federal Reserve can change the supply of money. As soon as the supply of money changes, the interest rate will change. If the Federal Reserve goal is to deal with recession and eliminate that recessionary gap that I was just talking about in chapter 13, the Federal Reserve should do the expansionary monetary policy, expand the economy, just like the fiscal policy. Okay? And if the Federal Reserve wants to eliminate the inflationary gap and reduces basically the aggregate demand, then the Federal Reserve will implement the restrictive monetary policy. Okay. So again, we have expansionary and restrictive or contractionary. The name is different. So let me briefly tell you about recession and how the Federal Reserve can deal with recession. So when we have recession, it means that the economy is slow, right? So the Federal Reserve actually can do something in the money market that might impact the aggregate demand, aggregate supply. So the goal again here is to increase the aggregate demand because we have recession. Okay, how we can do that? Remember that the Federal Reserve can basically change the investment component in GDP, kind of indirectly through the money market. How? The Federal Reserve can change the interest rate. As soon as the interest rate changes, the investment and also consumption expenditures will change, right? Because if the interest rate is low, the investors can borrow more money. Remember, the interest rate is the opportunity cost of borrowing money. So when the interest rate is low, it means that borrowing is cheap. So the investors will borrow more money, invest more money in the economy, GDP will go up. Also, individuals and households will also get more personal loans. They start buying, new houses. They take a new loan, personal loans. They open a new credit card, right? Because interest rate is just low. So they start using their credit card more often. So this key component also in aggregate demand starts to increase, the GDP starts to increase, okay? So how the Federal Reserve can reduce this interest rate, change this interest rate? By increasing the supply of money. Remember in chapter 14, whenever the supply of money increases, the interest rate will go down. If the supply of money decreases, the interest rate will go up. Since here the Federal Reserve wants to deal with recession, so the Federal Reserve should reduce the interest rate. Because again, the interest rate is the opportunity cost of borrowing money. So the Federal Reserve starts injecting money in the economy, starts increasing the supply of money. So the supply of money will shift to the right, the interest rate will go down. Remember, the supply of money is vertical. Remember from chapter 14. So as soon as the interest rate drops, people start borrowing more money, investment will go up, consumer spending will go up, so the aggregate demand will increase. The goal here is for us to push the aggregate demand to the right. Again, because of the expenditure, because of the multiplier effect, again, we have the multiplier effect here, as well as the fiscal policy in chapter 13. Because of the multiplier effect, the aggregate demand will go up eventually. It won't happen that there is no such a thing as a huge jump in aggregate demand, because it will take for individuals to spend that money, borrow that money. It takes a while for investors also to invest in the economy again because of recession. So there are kind of gradual change in aggregate demand, increase in aggregate demand. And you can think about also the opposite case when the Federal Reserve is dealing with inflation. In that case, the Federal Reserve goal is to reduce the aggregate demand, shift the aggregate demand to the left. So this time, the Federal Reserve should make borrowing more expensive by increasing the interest rate, right? So the Federal Reserve starts to reduce the supply of money, starts to collect money from everybody's hand in the money market, all right? So look at the graph also for monetary policy, but that's pretty much it. I know that I put some information about, let me see, from for MPC, marginal propensity to consume, or MPS. I did not ask any questions, so you can definitely skip that part. So know about expansionary, contractionary, fiscal policy, and also monetary policy. Okay. Again, I did not put all the different sections in chapter 13 and chapter 16. So stick to my notes. Don't forget that you have again homework from these two chapters. Read my my weekly email. I try to put all the information for the homework there. This is your last homework. These are your last homework, so try not to miss anything. And get ready for the final, okay? And let me know if you have any question, all right? Have a good week, guys. And again, let me know if you have any questions, all right?